So Sara is going to start our session on assistive technology. The session is called The Top 5 Questions I Get Asked About Assistive Technology. And she's going to address 5 different things that she feels is most asked in our community among low vision and among her own career as a teacher of assistive technology. So we are going to turn over the microphone to Sara for a wonderful session, which I'm sure many of us are going to get a lot out of. So take it away, Sara.
Thank you, Maria. Hello, everyone. Can y'all hear me? Awesome. Well, as she said, my name is Sara Nappi. I've been affected for 9 years, and I've turned my personal passion into my professional passion. Since being affected, I went back to school, and I got a master's degree in vision studies from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And I'm a certified vision rehab therapist, as well as a certified assistive technology instructional specialist, which is kind of a mouthful. But I have a great deal of passion for what I do, and I really enjoy teaching. I enjoy being stumped by questions, because it gives me an opportunity to learn something new. So save your questions, and I'm looking forward to seeing if I can get stumped. All right, I already covered that part. So introduction. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a poll. And how we're going to do this is we're not going to communicate by raising our hands. We are going to communicate with 2 claps. And I'm going to ask each question that I'm going to address, and I'd like to get a poll of what you all use. So the first question, and I'm going to just have people who are affected answer, just because we want to get or if you are not affected and you want to answer for your loved one who might not be here. But I want a picture of what people with vision impairments use. So first is going to be the question of iPhone versus Android. So if you use an iPhone, clap twice. All right, if you use an Android, clap twice. Okay, there's a couple. So because there's that difference, I will focus on the iPhone, but a lot of the information I'll present is transferable to Android. The next question is, who uses a Mac computer? Clap twice if you use a Mac. Okay, clap twice if you use a PC. Okay, that was about what I had predicted. Okay, so my next question is going to be about the Freedom Scientific products, ZoomText, Fusion, and JAWS. And if you don't know what those are yet, that's okay. But I will take a poll. If you use ZoomText, clap twice. If you use Fusion, clap twice. Okay, if you use JAWS, clap twice. Okay. Or, there will be more. Or if you don't know what that is, clap twice. Awesome, that's great. I'm glad that there's people who will be surprised by some information. All right, so the last question is, how do I read text in my environment? So my poll for this will be, if you walk up to a door and there's a sign on the door and you don't know what it says, but let's say it's a business you want to get into, and you need to read that sign. To read that sign, would you use an app? Clap twice. Okay. Would you take a picture and zoom in? Clap twice. Okay. Would you grab a sighted person and be like, what does that say? Clap twice. Maybe all 3, depending on the situation. All right. So I'm going to start with the iPhone. So we had a lot of people clap twice for the iPhone. And one of the reasons for that is Apple has great tech support, and they really take into account what the customer calls and tells them they're having problems with. I can't tell you the number of times I've called Apple Accessibility Tech Support, asked for something to be changed, and it's changed. It's quite amazing. So the first thing that I was introduced to when I became affected was making the iPhone easier to see. Now there's some key points on how to do this, and I'll go over those now. So in order to increase text size, which is very helpful, you can go under Settings, Display and Text Size, and then go to text size. There's a meter at the bottom of the screen. You can crank that as far up as you would like. There's also higher accessibility text sizes that you can get it even bigger if you want to. Another thing that can be quite helpful for us, and we heard yesterday one of the doctors say about how it can be damaging to the cornea to hold your phone so close to your face, even though almost all of us do it. One of the workarounds for making that a little better is to put your phone into what's called dark mode. And what that means is it's white text on a black background. Now, that decreases the amount of glare and it reduces visual fatigue. So that can be set under, this is also under display settings. That's not even an accessibility setting, that's just under display. I find this quite helpful. Most apps will behave the same way that you've asked your phone to act, as if you want it dark mode or light mode. And that, I think, is quite helpful for reducing glare. Okay, so some of my most important accessibility settings for making things easier to see are first, bold text. There's a saying in the field that bigger, bolder is better. So if you make your text bolder, it's easier to see. Another thing that can be quite helpful is to make Apple products look good. They've made some things transparent, which isn't helpful for us. So you can reduce transparency. There's a simple toggle to reduce transparency. There's also the ability to turn on high contrast. The more contrast, the easier things are to see on the phone. So those are the things you can do if you're accessing your phone visually. There's also the zooming in feature, or magnifying the screen. That can be accomplished, well, in 3 different ways. The first way that I personally use, because I think it's the easiest, is once you turn on that feature, you can do the 3-finger double tap and scroll in to make it even bigger. There's also a zoom controller where you can put a little button somewhere on the screen, tap it, and select zoom in. There's also the ability to do that with VoiceOver on, which is a little bit trickier because the two kind of compete when you have VoiceOver on and when you're using magnifier. VoiceOver likes to assume you can't see anything, so it makes it difficult when you're using Vision with VoiceOver on. So if you've experienced it, that's why. I need to just keep this in my hand. All right. What'd I do? Which one's that? Same one. Okay, thank you. All right. So I talked about Zoom. Yay, all right, let's talk about VoiceOver. So VoiceOver is the screen reader for iOS devices, so for your iPad and your iPhone. And for me, this was a game changer when I started to use VoiceOver more frequently. And one of the things I noticed from using Vision all the time is my phone is right on my face, my shoulder is tight, everything's getting uncomfortable if I'm using my phone for extended periods of time. And we learned yesterday that it's better to have it at arm's length. So one way to achieve that with low vision is to use VoiceOver. Many things can be achieved with VoiceOver. Sometimes when you have low vision, it's easier to toggle it off for like certain short tasks, just like that. For example, if I want to look at a photo of my 7-year-old son, I will turn VoiceOver off and I'll zoom in with whatever method I'm using at that time. Because with VoiceOver on, they compete and it's difficult to scroll around the screen and look at how adorable he is. So a couple things I recommend for VoiceOver is to turn on the accessibility shortcut. That can be achieved. It's at the end of the accessibility settings for vision, way at the bottom. And it can be turned on so that 3 taps on that side button will toggle on VoiceOver, 3 taps will toggle it off. Now for that accessibility shortcut, many other things can be added to it. And I'd like to say simplify it, less is more. Just have it do one thing. Because otherwise you're going to be visually trying to tap through all those options, and that can be challenging. There's also a tutorial on VoiceOver. I've had people use that with limited success. It's not the best yet. I think they have some room for improvement in their VoiceOver tutorial. But there's also some great resources, which we'll talk about now, which I already said was that Apple Accessibility phone number. Another great resource is Apple Viz, and I have a link on this slide, which y'all can access through your app. But it's just Apple VIS. They have the latest, up-to-date information about all the Apple products. All right, now let's talk about the Mac. Did I get there? Thank you. I'm nervous about this clicker after yesterday. So we only had a couple of Mac users, so I'm not going to talk about this too much, but I know this is being recorded, so for those who might listen in, I will address it. So the screen reader on a Mac is called the same thing. It's VoiceOver, but it's operated entirely differently than the phone. Pretty much everything you know about the phone, forget when you move into using it on the computer. You can operate the computer completely by the keyboard and by auditory feedback. The keyboard commands that are used for VoiceOver often include more keys than you have fingers. So my suggestion for that, to make it a little easier, is to turn on sticky keys, in which your VoiceOver commander, which is the VO keys, control and option, are stuck on unless you change that. So then you can use less fingers. The other suggestion I have for using a Mac, again, I'm going to apply all of those making it easier on the iPhone. All those settings are on the Mac, so I won't go over them again. But another feature that I think is very helpful for people with low vision using a Mac is called spoken content. What spoken content is another accessibility setting in which you can have keyboard echo for letters and words at the same time as you have mouse echo. What mouse echo is when you hover over something, it will speak it out loud. Now, a tip for that, so it's not completely annoying, is to make it so there's a little bit of a delay so that you can visually get to what you want read and have it wait 1 second or whatever you choose and then have it read so it's not just constantly spouting at you. There's also an accessibility shortcut to turn VoiceOver on and off on the Mac, which you can set up under those accessibility settings. Now, the tutorial for VoiceOver on the Mac is actually great, so I would suggest using that as the first time you use it. Turn on that tutorial and go through all of the settings, all of it. There's also, of course, there's magnification. You can zoom in. You can make it bigger. Now, for that, and this goes across the board when using a computer with low vision, is to get a large monitor. If you have a large monitor, that's head height, instead of looking down at your laptop monitor, you're gonna save your back, shoulders, all of it. And it just naturally makes those words larger, which makes everything easier. Another thing I think that gets quite a bit easier is if you have an external keyboard. They make keyboards that are large print, and high contrast. And it spaces out those keys just enough to make it easier to type and find your modifier keys, such as the arrows, and then we'll talk more about those keys in the future too. But big fan of the large print keyboard. And not necessarily so you can see the keys, maybe just while you're learning, because touch typing is very important for a person with a vision impairment. Because if you're constantly looking down, you're going to hurt your back, it's going to slow you down, and your productivity will be affected. There are 3 options that I wanted to talk about for that magnifier on the Mac, and this applies to the PC as well. There is such thing as a full screen magnifier, a docked magnifier, which will stay right at the top of the screen or right at the bottom and only magnify right where you are, but it kind of stays right at the top, or the lens magnifier. Now, these are useful for different people, and it's totally personal preference. Everything I talk about today is personal preference. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm giving you options. I like to tell that to all of my clients because I like people to know what's out there so they can try it, but you by no means have to do any of the things I've said today. All right, let's talk about the built-in accessibility for PC. So there's other options, as somebody said. It's not just ZoomText, Fusion, and JAWS, but there's some built-in things for the PC that can be super helpful. The first option, which I think is great as a low-vision computer user, is to make the mouse and the cursor larger and brighter. This is just under those, for Windows 11, it's called accessibility settings. And for Windows 10, it's called ease of access. And it's quite easy to just make your cursor larger so that it's easier to find it on the screen. I'm also a big fan of the high contrast mode. On Windows 10, it's called high contrast mode. On Windows 11, it's called night sky, is actually what the color theme is. And what that does is it reduces visual clutter. It takes out, like if you have a desktop backdrop that is like all these beautiful flowers and whatnot, well, that makes those icons very difficult to see and to visually distinguish. So, hold on. It happened. Brian, I told you. Okay, so the way I'm presenting right now is I have VoiceOver on my phone and I have an earbud telling me what to say. VoiceOver just lost focus, so I have to find out where I just was. Give me one moment. Found it. All right. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, that high contrast mode reduces visual clutter. And when operating the computer visually, it's quite helpful. So that same thing goes for light versus dark mode. It's personal preference about what to use, but it can be less visually fatiguing if you use the dark mode. So as with our other 2 devices we've already discussed, you can use the magnifier, and that's turned on any Windows computer. You could walk into a library today, hold down Windows and press the plus key, and you can magnify the screen. I love that because I can use any computer anywhere, for the most part, with that keyboard command for a Windows computer. So the built-in screen reader for Windows is called Narrator. Now, Narrator is useful as a secondary screen reader to one of the other options. Or if you aren't too much of a computer user and you only use it rarely, this might be enough for you. Narrator has some great settings that are built into the PC. You don't have to purchase third-party software or install any third-party software. This can be turned on any Windows computer with Control, holding Control and Windows and pressing Enter. A couple of features that are helpful with Narrator is, again, that mouse echo. You hover over the text and it reads it aloud with your mouse. One of the drawbacks of Narrator is it doesn't have that delay, so it's just going to keep reading. It never goes very quiet in between what's going on. But you are able to use this screen reader fully accessibly. I would recommend for anybody who is a screen reader user to know that keyboard command in case your primary screen reader fails, which, as we all know, tech happens. All right, so I'm going to talk about 3 of the Freedom Scientific, now Vespero, products called ZoomText, Fusion, and JAWS. These options are widely known as some of the best out there. There's also NVDA, non-visual desktop access, which is a free third-party screen reader and is operated with many of the same keyboard commands. So I'm not ruling it out. It's actually a great screen reader, but I'm focusing on these 3 for today. So I'd like to talk about some of the benefits, some of the pros, and some of the cons of each. So first, let's talk about ZoomText. So what ZoomText does is you're able to make a lot of color adjustments that we've kind of already talked about and magnify with the use of ZoomText. There's a feature with ZoomText where you can do that mouse hover and it speaks aloud what's there. And this can be very useful for low vision users who are just using the speech to read those longer passages, a longer email, a full article, things like that. Now, the difference between ZoomText and Fusion is that Fusion is JAWS with ZoomText. Now, with that said, it's a very robust program. It's really big. You need to have quite a bit of RAM and processing speed to run Fusion. Otherwise, your computer is going to be laggy. And if you're like me, I don't like a slow computer. It's got to keep up with me. So that's one of the drawbacks of Fusion. Otherwise, I would recommend it to many people with LHON. My example of that is in Outlook. So Microsoft Outlook is an email platform that is super accessible. It's my favorite. And if you open an email with JAWS or with ZoomText, it will open within a second. With Fusion turned on, it can take up to 7 seconds. I don't got time for that. So many people who use Fusion and find that frustrating, and you might not even find that. Maybe your computer is a fast enough processor that this isn't an issue. They may switch to JAWS. And JAWS is the full screen reader provided by Freedom Scientific. Now, with this, if you're a low vision user and you still want to use some vision, you can use the built-in magnifier that's already on the PC. And it does many of the same things that ZoomText would have achieved. The only thing it does not do is mouse echo. So if you want things to be read when you hover the mouse over them. So you'll really have to get to know your keyboard commands in order to have everything read. So I am personally a JAWS user, and I use magnifier when I want to use some vision on my computer, because I think it's the fastest. Did it again. Hold on. Some of the learning resources for Freedom Scientific and why I recommend Freedom Scientific over NVDA many of the times is because they have great tech support and they have great online learning. So you can call Vespero or Freedom Scientific and ask them questions anytime. You have problems with it, call them up. And they have online learning. I've provided the links in this slide for the online learning. They have webinars that are on demand that will walk you through exactly how to use these products. I use these as in-between lesson teaching for my clients who are new to using these products. So essentially, you could be self-taught by going through these webinars. So I find that very useful. Another resource is Hadley, Hadley. Hadley is a free educational resource for people with vision impairments. Online, they have tutorials and classes, and talks and all these different discussion things for people with low vision, for technology, for gardening, lots of different things. It's a great resource, and I wanted to make sure to put a plug in because they're very helpful. All right, so here's a big one. Reading text in the environment. Did that go? Thank you. Reading text in the environment. As we noticed in our poll, there's many ways to do this. There's options for both iPhone and Android. I won't leave you out completely, Android users. So for the first app I'd like to talk about is Seeing AI. That's AI as in artificial intelligence. Seeing AI has two features I want to focus on, which is the text reader and the document scanner. This can be useful for just holding your phone up to a sign on a door and it will start reading. And it can also be that skill of holding the document reader up to a piece of mail that you've gotten and having it scan the entire piece of mail and read you about all of your bills, just in case you want to know about that. Those are two tools that can really increase independence. One of the things we all learn, being new to a vision impairment, is it's important to be comfortable asking for help. Yes, it is. It's okay to ask for help. It's also okay to try to be independent in some things, if you want to be, or if you're put in a position where there's nobody around to help. So, the app I'd like to focus on for Android is Sullivan Plus. Sullivan Plus, and that's named after Anne Sullivan, who was one of the first vision rehab therapists, is the same thing as Seeing AI, just a little different interface. You have the ability to do the quick text scan as well as the document scan for reading text in your environment. There's also Tap-Tap-See or Google Lens. It's 9:30. That means I have half an hour. We're getting there. Okay, so another one I wanted to talk about is Be My Eyes. Now, this is a free app for both Android and iOS users. Be My Eyes is useful for video support through your rear-facing camera to be connected with a random volunteer. Now, this may be useful if you want to read a package. So I'm going to insert my funny story here, because when I was newly affected, it was like maybe in the first 3 months. I was home alone, and I really wanted a smoothie. So I went in the freezer, I got what I thought was the frozen fruit, got my almond milk, peanut butter, protein, all the good stuff. I make my smoothie. It sounded like there was some extra grinding in there. So I taste the smoothie. That's not what I wanted. I then use my phone, magnify, and I put tater tots in my smoothie. So I had other options to just grabbing what I thought was the frozen fruit. One of those options would have been using Be My Eyes sighted support, or the OCR I just talked about with Seeing AI. And there's also low-tech solutions for that kind of thing, like put them on the opposite side of the freezer. Another thing that I think is really important to talk about with Be My Eyes is they have specialized support. The number one thing I've used their specialized support for is the Microsoft Disability Help Desk. You can make a video call to Microsoft Disability Help Desk, show them your computer, the error message you're getting, and they will walk you through how to fix it. Now, this is actually a benefit to being visually impaired, because if a sighted person, not that a sighted person can't use Be My Eyes, but if a sighted person calls and asks for tech support, they're going to be on hold, we get right through. So I'm a big fan of that. It's one of the things I teach to all my clients is that this is such a help because sometimes there's these error messages that aren't reading out loud with your screen reader, magnifier's not working, you're just in a mess. So this is a big one for me to introduce you to. Aira is another app, spelled A-I-R-A. Aira is not a free volunteer and it's not free. This is cited support by trained professionals. So this is useful for navigation and getting around. You can get up to 5 minutes free a day, and this could be useful maybe in an airport trying to find the terminal that you're at or something like that. And they'll often have maps of the locations that you're in, and there's often free areas too, like for example, some airports will have free Aira on site to help people with vision impairments. So on both iOS and Android, there's the Magnifier app, which is a location where you can invert the colors and turn that text in your environment to high contrast. You can invert the colors, you can do all those things, make it bigger, make it easier to see. On iOS, this can be added to your accessibility shortcut if you want it to be. And it's very useful for in a pinch when you need to read something. And also the most simple way, just open your camera and magnify using your camera on your phone. I think I use that the most frequently, or take a picture and then magnify, and then you end up with lots of pictures. So this is important too, getting assistive technology help after a conference. So I'm here until tomorrow morning, and I'm happy to help in any way I can. But what do you do when you're back home and you need help and you don't have it? What you can do is contact your state vocational rehabilitation program and see if you can get an assistive technology instructor. I'm blessed to live in the state of Maine, and we have the Division for the Blind and Visually Impaired, which is where I received all of my training. It was actually through the partner they pair with, named the Iris Network. And I went to a training center for 3 months of intensive training for tech, for the white cane, for cooking, lots of the different areas I needed to learn. So I'm blessed to have attended there. And now, after attending there, they actually offered me a job. And that's how I got a master's degree, is through learning all this stuff. And that's now where I work. So I'd like to offer to you all that the Iris Network has this training program, and your state VR program, vocational rehab program, may be able to send you to me. That was kind of a shameless plug because I just want to teach you all. But I like that resource because I needed intensive training when I was trying to learn this stuff, because I really needed to be efficient for whatever I was going to do next. The next option. I did it again. Okay. Wait for it. Of course, we have the assistive technology call through LHON. We have that every even month, the last Monday of the month. And I lead that call. We get lots of people who are brand new to assistive technology and lots of veteran users. And I love all the questions that people bring. It's very open-ended, so bring whatever you've got and we'll see if we can solve it. If we can't, I oftentimes will research it and then post the answer I find on the Facebook group, so that Assistive Technology and LHON Facebook group as well. And as I said before, is that Be My Eyes tech support through the app. One of the resources I wanted to talk about as well is if you are having trouble affording a computer, there's a company called Computers for the Blind and to people with vision impairments. They provide refurbished computers that come with a year free license for JAWS, Fusion, or ZoomText, whatever you request. And that's just a cheaper way to get a computer. Oh, that didn't go. I'm going to go to this one first. So I have some thank yous that I definitely want to mention, which is Maria and Jessica. Thank you for asking me to share. Thank you for helping me coordinate what I would present today. I'm thankful for the LHON community, which has helped me through this whole process and has taught me so much. I am also very thankful for where I work, the Iris Network, for sending me down here and helping me, giving me the time off to come. And the Division for the Blind and Visually Impaired, which helped provide the training for me to be educated so that I can pass it on to you all. And also, thank you for my friends and family who have stuck with me through this whole journey to becoming productive, one of our productive people that can, I'm so grateful to be able to give back to our community in this way, because this is why I got into it. It's that combination of professional and personal passion. So now I'm gonna go to questions. This is my favorite part. And we have Mary running around with a microphone. No questions too small. And if you stump me, I love it, because then I get to look it up and I get to learn something new. And there's people out there I might be like, does anybody else know?
Hi, my name is Rich. I'm from Chicago.
Hi, Rich.
You never mentioned the Hey Siri's aspect of turning on voiceover and turning off voiceover. Is that because you don't like to use it, or you just forgot to mention it, or what are your feelings on the Hey Siri's?
Great question. Hey Siri is a very useful tool. I fully support using that to turn voiceover on and off. She heard you, or she heard me. I'm going to turn that upside down. Yeah, so I'm going to turn my phone upside down because then she won't hear me because I'll probably say it again. It's a very useful tool. I find the accessibility shortcut a little faster. It's not that I don't recommend it. If it works for you, do it. But the accessibility shortcut is just a little quicker. So I hope, but Hey Siri is very useful. Another setting for Hey Siri that I missed, and I was just talking with somebody about in the back of the room, was when you use Siri, you can prefer spoken responses, and that's under Siri settings, so that you're getting an auditory response instead of just text on the screen, which is not very useful. So that's a big one. Thank you for your question.
Hi, Siri. Sarah. I called you Siri. Hi, Siri. Hi, Sarah. This is Richard from Colorado. My mother recently became affected, and she's 73. I'm a fairly decent user of assistive technology, but when trying to help her with using Siri, using assistive technology for her iPhone, magnifier, Zoom, etc., it's difficult. Do you have any tips or tricks with newly affected people and how to gradually integrate them into assistive technology?
Yes, that's a great question. Thank you. So a big part that I focus on when I get a new person I'm teaching this to is, what do they actually need to know? For somebody who's 73, they might have different areas of learning than somebody who's 20, right? Somebody who's 20 wants to use the entire thing. They want to do Facebook, they want to do Instagram, all of it. But somebody who's 73, they might just want to make text messages and phone calls and use Siri for the weather, you know? So sometimes the focus might just be on the use of Hey Siri to accomplish the things with an iPhone. There's also other assistive technology phones out there with a screen reader that has buttons, because there is such thing as the population that's, quote, non-digital natives. And what that means is the older population that didn't grow up with technology. It is way harder to learn when you didn't grow up with these in your hands. For example, my 7-year-old, when he was like 3, he knew how to turn on VoiceOver to have things read to him because he couldn't read yet. I'm like, this kid's impressive. But, you know, you put that in the hands of someone who's maybe in their 70s or 80s, it doesn't compute the same. And that's just because they didn't grow up with it. So my tip would be to start small with the use of Hey Siri to make phone calls. If she doesn't have an iPhone, there's phones out there. There's one called the Blind Shell, which is it's a phone with buttons that has a full screen reader as well. Or there's one called the Raz Mini 2, R-A-Z. That one's also useful with a screen reader, high contrast, and much more simple to use than, because a person might not want as much of the complicated stuff, because then you have to do software updates and restart the phone, and what if this goes wrong? So that's kind of my tip for somebody who's newly affected at 73-ish.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Happy to talk more too. Do we have another one?
Yeah. So my name is Johanna, and Johanna. I'm from Germany, and I'm a Hey Siri user, and I feel like I actually talk to somebody if I said Hey Siri, you know.
Yes.
And but every time I go to Germany, I cannot use it. So I wonder if there's a way to use it.
Interesting. So, couple of things. Have you? I'm assuming. Do you speak German?
Yes.
You
Yes.
might be. Yes. Okay. You could try it in the German language as well, because Siri does have many languages. So you could try it. Do you mean in the country of Germany? Hey Siri, does it work?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Interesting. Because it requires like either data, so cellular data, which you might not have access to in Germany, or Wi-Fi. So if you're connected to Wi-Fi, you should be able to use it. But you might need to get an international plan for your cellular provider to be able to have data while you're there. We've got an Android over there.
Does it work with an Android, maybe? Yeah, I've heard that. I'm unfortunately with AT&T, and
You can get an international plan so that you have access. But sometimes that's a reason to use other assistive technology options on the iPhone, is what if you don't have internet? VoiceOver still works if you don't have internet access or data access. So like I heard you like to hike, Hey Siri is not going to work in the mountains most places. So you might need to have secondary option to be able to find out information that's on your phone. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
On the Apple tech support website, it's saying you can enable it in any country.
So
So
Siri
maybe-
can be enabled.
Yeah,
You still
so-
need
so-
internet or data though. For
Yeah,
it to
but
work.
it doesn't have to be international internet or data, so maybe you could call them.
Apple Accessibility, give them a call. They're so helpful and they're so friendly.
okay, thank you.
Good morning, Sara. Thanks for your presentation. I'm John Knox from Connecticut. Just on the subject of traveling, I've tried to use just Google Maps, where you get directions, you say an address, and then get directions, and then have it speak to you. So wear an earbud and have it, direct me in a city. And I've done this domestically and internationally, and sometimes it's completely the opposite of the way I'm supposed to go. It doesn't seem to work at all. Do you have any recommendation? And I think actually one of the panelists yesterday, Rob, I think, mentioned somebody asked him about a restaurant, and he said something into his phone and somehow got to a restaurant. So I'm looking for technology for walking around and getting directions into my ear as to where to go next.
I actually have had pretty good luck with Apple Maps and Google Maps. So you might have stumped me on that one. And you said you're an iPhone user?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
I haven't tried Apple Maps, so maybe that's the way to
It
go next.
might be more accurate, but it's the same navigation system that a car would use. It's the same GPS information for walking directions. So, in my mind, it should be accurate. So,
Yeah. And I've used Waze when traveling in a car, but I couldn't find a button for walking directions on Waze.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I don't think Waze has it, but that's a good question. I will. I don't know if you're on the Assistive Technology Facebook group, but that's one I think I'll post about and talk more about navigation, because I've had luck with those. So I'm curious why it didn't work.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Right, right. If you don't have good reception, or if it's not well mapped already, then it might not have accurate information.
Hi, Tim Johnson from Charlotte. You caught my ear, I guess, when you said that you've talked to Apple support directly and gotten things changed.
Yes.
That sounds pretty impressive. I guess one question, like, can you give an example of that? And then also you mentioned Microsoft support later, but have you also reached out to any non-Apple or Microsoft, software, I guess the assistive technology softwares, but any other vendor or anything else with questions or improvements or things like that specifically?
Absolutely. So as a professional and a user of these things, I think we need to be the advocates to say your app is not accessible. So I do CrossFit. So the CrossFit gym that uses the specific app, and it wasn't compatible with VoiceOver. So I emailed the company and I said, here's the glitches I'm finding. Can you adjust them? And they did. It wasn't instant. I think it took a couple months, but that's normal. They have to program it and figure it all out. It wasn't CrossFit. It was the actual app they use, which was Wodify. And then for Apple accessibility, one of my favorite changes was I was teaching a person who spoke the language Kinyarwanda, and it wasn't yet on the Apple phone. It wasn't on iOS yet. So I called Apple accessibility first to make sure I wasn't missing something. And they said, no, we don't have that language. And then the next iOS update, they added that language. So I can't say I'm the only one that did that. There probably was 100 other people calling. But if we aren't calling, how are they going to know about the problems? And then there's another example of the Voice Ava. If you use the Voice Ava on iOS devices and on the Mac, the way that the time is read is it'll say, what does it say? 10 meters, 51 S. Like, it doesn't read 10:51 a.m. And so I've called Apple on that one, and they told me the workaround. They haven't yet fixed it, but they've told me the workaround, and they hope to fix it in the next iOS update. So I encourage everybody to call with your problems, because they pay attention, and it's not just me. I'm not that special. We can all make that change. And every time I was talking with a gentleman about an app he uses and it's not accessible. Again, that's another opportunity to email the company and say, hey, this is the screen reader I use. Your app isn't working. I want to use your app, because after all, that's revenue for them. And they'll usually make the change.
This is Jessica. I'm just going to plus one everything Sara said. I work in the accessibility space, and I would probably jump on your accessibility email within probably 10 minutes if you did message about that you had an accessibility issue. So just being in the accessibility space, it's a number one priority to make sure we're answering those emails and to make sure that whatever your experience is accessible, and if there is an issue, that it's addressed super fast. So just plus wanting being in the industry that's super high, so we jump on those pretty fast. And those bugs and anything like that are put into the front of the roadmap most of the time if they're blocking somebody's process to be able to complete that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, so I'm not sure if you mentioned the QR reader for the camera. And Richard from Colorado actually has a really neat technique for adding context, if he wants to share that, and how to use the camera to do that. So, and the other part I wanted to share was voiceover on sometimes Facebook images, pictures. It actually starts describing if someone's at the beach or doing different things, and I'm sure you have more insight on that, but thought I would, I'm not sure if you shared it earlier, those two parts.
Thank you for bringing those two up. I did not. I think I could probably stand up here and talk for 4 hours. But I didn't mention those two things. Yeah, if you do want to read a QR code, Those are those like little like black and white square images kind of thingies. You just open your camera on your phone, Android or iOS, and it will pull up a link for where you want to go. And Richard from Colorado did create his contact as a QR code, which was really cool. And you can just, he holds it up and you can scan it from your phone and save it right away. So he's like the king of networking here, so. So yeah, if you want to know more, I'm happy to have Richard share how, or that could be a personal question you ask him after. It's up to you guys.
Hi, this is Rich again from Chicago.
Yes.
On many apps, when you press a link, it'll ask for your email address and password. Do you have any shortcuts for this? Because for me to have VoiceOver on and to put in my email address and the password is very time consuming. Or if I use dictation, it often does not repeat my email address correctly.
Yes. Passwords are the most difficult thing in assistive technology. They're very challenging because for passwords, if you enter it with a screen reader, oftentimes if you want to do the letter S, it'll be like star. And you're like A star. And it's like, did I do the right thing? This is where a password manager may come in handy. So such as the Identikey on the iPhone or iPad. And Identikey, yeah, so that's the keychain is what sometimes people call it. And that will save all of those passwords so that you don't have to re-enter them. It should be set up by default on an iOS device, but if it's not, you can go to that under settings and turn on Identikey so that it will save your passwords. There's also other password managers that cross platforms from, say, for example, even your Android to your Mac, from your iOS to your PC. One that was brought up in the assistive technology call on Monday was called Bitword, B-I-T and Word. And that will save all of your passwords for everything across devices. So you just have to remember one password for Bitword. And then you can create those like really complicated passwords that make it super secure. So that's an example of maybe where you want to use a password manager to make it a little easier. Or I haven't said this yet either. You can also hook up an external keyboard to your iOS device. So you can get a little tiny Bluetooth keyboard to enter information on your smartphone or your tablet, which you can be more accurate when you're typing with your fingers instead of on a touch screen. Sarah, yes. Yes, Face ID is a great way to save your password. So that would be with the keychain, the Apple keychain. And so it's taking the image of your face and entering your password for you. That's exactly, yep. Thank you. I think there was something more to your question. Did I miss it or did I answer it?
Entering your...
Oh, dictation. Yes, so dictation will sometimes automatically insert spaces or periods where it thinks they should be. So sometimes dictation isn't the most reliable way to enter information. You might need to use that touchscreen input to. Shortcuts for email address. You can actually, again, that's something that it can enter for you. There's oftentimes a suggestion at the top of your keyboard that says, use snappy207@gmail.com, which is my email address, and it will enter it for you. There's also ways to set up a shortcut. For example, I type the word client a lot in my case notes and stuff like that. So if I hit the letter C with a space, the word client appears. So if you do, for example, my email address, the letter S and then a space, my whole email address could appear once you set up that shortcut. And I could probably go into that more. I don't know the exact steps for how to do that memorized. Yes, you can do that on the iPhone and PC and Mac. It's a great shortcut, makes it much quicker. But I could put out step-by-step instructions on that, maybe on the Facebook group or, yeah, that one's really helpful. I don't know it off the top of my head.
And Sarah,
Yes.
with that said, If you have any more questions, please feel free to find Sara throughout the day, and you can ask her more questions because, like she said, she could talk for 4 more hours on this, and I'm sure everyone has their questions. But we are going to have to move on for our next session. So thank you so much, Sara. What an amazing presentation. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.